Hi there, everybody, and welcome to today's AOP Live webinar. First of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Now, if you're new to this format, it's all about your questions. We have one single slide we're going to share with you, which is related to a poll. But aside from that, there are no slides throughout our conversation. So I want to thank everybody in advance who actually submitted the question that we're going to share with our panelists today. We also, of course, invite you to ask questions throughout today's AOP Live, and you can do that. There's a little box underneath the screen as you're watching it. You can pop any questions into there. We're going to keep an eye open onto them as we go through. And actually keeping an eye on those questions is my partner at Art of Procurement, Kelly Barner. Kelly, welcome to today's live stream.
Thank you so much. And actually, I have to say, this group is ready to go. We already have questions that have come in live in the last 3 minutes. So this is going to be a really engaged conversation. In between it being my turn to be your voice as the speaker on behalf of the audience, you'll probably see me down here typing away. I'm checking all of your questions as they come in. And then, Phil, I'm sure you'll give me opportunities to jump in and pose some of these questions.
Yeah, we're going to keep you on camera today as for the first time as we do this AOP Live in this format.
Everybody's now going to see how exciting it is behind the scenes.
Yeah, but then you'll be on. Keep yourself on guard for the odd question or two that may come your way. Now, in terms of today's topic, we're going to talk about transformation. And the title of today's topic is Transformation as a Journey, Not a Destination. I'm going to talk about the transformation journey of a company called Sarepta Therapeutics. Now, in this conversation, we're going to talk about how do we connect a vision at the start of a transformation journey into the reality? Like, how do we actually put that into practice? And what are all the roadblocks that you will typically come across as you go on that journey, and some tips to overcome some of those? And then we'll break the journey down into the different stages as you go through transformation. Now, we have two guests that will be joining us today. We'll be joined by Chris Kane. Chris is Senior Director of Global Procurement and Strategic Sourcing at Sarepta. And also Jennifer Ulrich. Jen is the Vice President of Advisory at Corcentric. So without further ado, let's bring Jen and Chris on stage. Well, welcome to Jen and welcome to Chris to today's AOP Live. I want to thank you, first of all, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Now, we typically start with a question that I think Jen knows well. So, Chris, I'm going to pose this to you, and we have something a little bit different for Jen. We always ask the question to start with, how did you find procurement? So did you find procurement, or did procurement find you, Chris?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say I found procurement. I wasn't honestly even necessarily aware of the field coming out of college. I had a lot of friends going into sales. Sales wasn't exactly a good personality fit for me. But interestingly, I had some family that actually works in corporate law, and some of them were involved in supply chain, procurement, and sourcing contracts, and they were explaining this whole field of being on the other side of sales, procurement and sourcing. So I started looking into that, and I thought it was just a really, really good fit. And I've been doing that ever since. So it was really one of my first jobs out of college. So I didn't necessarily find it. It was kind of suggested to me based on my personality and the fact that I was told I like to debate and challenge things and argue different perspectives. So it was a great recommendation, though.
You know, there's probably more sales in procurement than you thought when you were getting into it as well.
Yeah. Right.
Jen, now I've got a little different question than we usually ask for you. I want to know a little bit, because you've got a deep background in procurement transformation. When you think about procurement transformation, are there any particular areas of specialty where you think, you know, that's really my sweet spot, or that's what I enjoy the most, or where I found myself to have most impact?
I would have to say it's in the beginning element, and I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is the maturity assessment and the road mapping piece, mainly because you get to kind of touch all the aspects of procurement. To your point about being in sales, like I was funny. So I'm doing career day next week with my kids. And I'm thinking about how do I explain this to a bunch of fourth graders, right? And I think it's kind of cool that I'll be able to say, well, I'm in sales, I'm a teacher, I'm in marketing. Because you do a little bit of everything in your role.
Mhm.
And that's what really, with procurement transformation, that's why I enjoy that area of my work the most, because it's digging in, it's being inquisitive, it's really the most consultative, I think, aspect of it, because then there's the execution of it, which is just implementing all of those ideas. But I like the idea generation of, where do you want to go? How do you want to get there? And let's figure out how we do that.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk about that somewhat today as we go into the details of the conversation. But actually, the first thing that I wanted to do, and it's something we've started to do with the AOP Live conversations, is to ask our community a poll question that's related to the topic of the conversation, and then just have a little bit of a conversation around it. So let me just bring this up on stream. The question that we asked was, what is the most important factor in advancing procurement's maturity? I'm going to read out the results for anybody who's listening to this as a podcast afterwards who can't see the slide on screen. We had 334 votes on this poll, and the answers were the most important factor was actually a tie at the top with 38% each, and that was processes and frameworks, along with C-level support. In third place was salaries and training at 16% in terms of importance. And then fourth, I don't want to say last, because I'm sure there's lots of other elements that could play into procurement's maturity, is sophisticated tech, which came in at 8% of the votes. Jen, you talked about the fact you're involved in a lot of procurement transformations. How does this, what did you think, first of all, when you saw these results?
To be honest, I'm actually really excited to see that people are thinking like this. I mean, it's what we talk about all the time, is that you have to have the right processes and the right support at the top before you can move ahead. But what I find is that when you see these polls, people kind of just go to technology. Well, we need technology. We need technology. So I'm actually pleased to see this is exactly how I would have viewed it, honestly. It's right in perfect order, I think.
Awesome. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree. I was pretty impressed. I think the tie is very interesting, because I think C-level support is extremely important, right? But going in with a process and framework that doesn't align with the what the C-suite is expecting, right? There could be a conflict there. So I think they're both equally as important, and I also agree with the salaries, training, the technology. But I find that the response of those being a tie is fascinating.
Interesting. Now, Kelly, this is one of the moments I'm going to come and ask you to comment. Now, where was your vote on this one?
So my vote was processes and frameworks. And I think what I like about this, and I know because I posted it, we didn't define maturity, right? So a little bit of a Rorschach test there. What did people have in their minds when they were answering this question? And what these results suggest to me is that most of the respondents see maturity in terms of the results that procurement is able to deliver. And in order to deliver meaningful, sustainable results, you need those strong internal capabilities through frameworks and process that include people beyond procurement, but you also need C-level support to open doors, because it can't just be those same categories of spend that we keep remanaging. It's about accessing new spend and supplier relationships and opportunities to impact the business. So I think this, plus let's just celebrate that 8%. Thank you, right? It's not just tech. I think that is a great sign in terms of how procurement interprets what maturity means.
Yeah, it's not a silver bullet, which we talk about a lot.
We do.
And for me, when I looked at this, I'm kind of racking my brain back to how I answered. I think I answered C-level support, which is an interesting one for me, because I'm very much in the camp that we shouldn't expect C-level support. We have to earn it, and we have to do it by the actions that we take. But on the other hand, we can't truly advance our maturity without it. So it's not kind of that it's necessarily the first thing that you need, but it's the thing that we need to be working towards to have as big an impact as we possibly can. All right, so let me ask the first question as we go into, Chris, your journey at Sarepta. And really the first question I had is if you could just give a little bit of context for our viewers and our listeners today about what you do at Sarepta as a company, like from an organizational perspective.
Yeah, so great question. Sarepta is an amazing company. We have some really lofty, impressive goals. But so we're a rare disease biotechnology company focused on, at the moment, muscular dystrophy, so DMD, which is really a severely unmet, patient population. And we strive, one of our kind of credos is dragging tomorrow into today, right? So it's an incredible company. The culture is really focused around, pushing and striving to reach as many patients with these treatments as soon as possible. So it's a really amazing company. We're blazing the trail for gene therapy. We are actively working towards. We just submitted an accelerated approval for BLA, which is very exciting. So it's a company that is never settled with status quo, and we continue to push and look to be, the innovator and largest gene therapy company in the world.
And so from a culture perspective, and this kind of goes into procurement, do you feel like really everyone is on the same path in terms of it's all about patient outcomes? Like, what can we do to drive patient outcomes? And that's what the organization kind of comes together around?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. There's no ambiguity. There's no misalignment that it's all about patients, right? And then all of our goals, everything we do as a company is structured around that. Every decision we make is patient focused, right? How does this impact our patients, the patient community, their families, their caregivers? So that is one thing that from day one, and it's continued to be constant throughout this company. It's patient focused.
So what I want to just take you through the journey a little bit, and Jen, I'm going to come in and bring you into the journey as we talk about it with Chris, and then ask some specific questions around that journey and some of the things that you see externally as you view kind of across a range of different procurement transformations. But for your journey at Sarepta, Chris, kind of when in time and where from a maturity perspective were you when you began that journey where you said, you know what, we want to really invest in our procurement capabilities?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I would say it was from day one when I was hired in 2019. And really, through the interview process, I realized that it was, Sarepta had brought in some consultants as the company had grown, its spend had grown. They had some consultants that came in and just basically said, like, you're at the size and scale that you really need to start centralizing how you source it and spend at Sarepta to maximize value. So it was basically that those consultants that had come in and done an assessment for our CFO at the time that led to the job posting and the building of a recommendation to build out a procurement organization. So, and that's what attracted me to the position to apply in the first place. So it was really, the journey started even in the interview process of asking questions about what that may look like and how we go down that path.
Did you find that we talked in the last slide about the C-level support, and obviously, you're brought in to help drive this transformation. Was the C-level support there from the start? Was that something that, as you went on your journey, it was about earning that support?
So it was there from the start in that, again, at the time that, our CFO had said, all right, well, I understand that, we spend a lot, how can we do this better? And going through that process to get that recommendation. And he was super supportive. But then it was really beyond that. It was like, okay, we agree that we need this. And then it was it was on me to kind of sell what that vision would be, right? And to get our executive team and our C-suite to align with what that vision would be and how we're going to do this. Because it was completely new to everyone in the company, right? There were people that had come from places that had it. Our executive committee had worked at other places that had it, but really kind of going through what that would look like. So they were supportive from day one, but it was, what does it look like? How are we going to do this? And what that, the speed, the momentum, the investment, all of that was on me to kind of continue to push and to some degree educate them, right? Because I think that, everyone has their own perspectives on what procurement is. So I wanted to make sure that I was educating them along the way, so that my recommendations and what I was pushing, aligned with what they were thinking. But so the support was definitely there.
And I imagine because this was the first time that, as you look at as Sarepta grew to now be the size and the scale where it made sense to want to go on this procurement journey, there's probably a lot of convincing folks within the business who were used to being able to, for the want of better words, kind of do their own thing. You always see in situations like this where companies grow and a lot of the stakeholders will say, well, we grew because of the way that we operated, as opposed to, well, actually, there's a different way and maybe we can build some more structure to it. So there's an element of convincing those who were used to having no procurement to then start going through different processes.
Right, I agree, and I think that's always the challenge, again, because this is a completely new function. Mm-hmm. But again, going back to the culture at Sarepta, the way things were done was all patient focused, right? So it was about pushing milestones, making sure that we could secure manufacturing capacity, and making sure that we could get as many studies and programs up and running to the patient community, right? And there's acknowledgement that sometimes doing that in that way may not have incorporated procurement best practices, unfortunately. But that was a thoughtful trade-off of where we were at the time to make sure that, again, it was patients first.
And were there any external factors that influenced that being the right time to start on this journey?
I think there's always external factors, just in terms of being efficient and extracting the most amount of value from our investments, right? Mm-hmm. So there wasn't necessarily any catalyst or something that happened, right? But again, I think if you think about, again, and this is where I said it's very consistent the way our management operates, is that, okay, we want to move as quickly as possible for our patient community, but then also making sure that we're wise with our investments also ties back to the patients, right? We want to make sure that we can fund all the right programs and prioritize what the patient's needs are, right? Even just looking at the cost of drugs for all companies is mm-hmm. something that there's so much that goes into it, years and years. So again, being thoughtful about the way we spend is really about, again, how we can drive more value for our patients.
So I see lots of questions coming in already. I do want to go a little bit deeper into the conversation before we start bringing some of those across. But Jen, I wanted to just come over to you and ask, when did you first meet Chris and Chris's team?
Well, that's sort of an interesting question, the way you've paired that. So we've known Chris for a long time, actually. Mm-hmm. So even before Sarepta, we worked with Chris at 2 other companies prior to this. So he's been not only taking us along his journey at Sarepta, but other places as well. So that's been a nice compliment for sure to the team. But like he mentioned, when he was hired in 2019, he was a one-man show pretty much mm-hmm. at the time. And it's actually been over the last couple of years that at one point our team was his team. And then we've evolved with him, and now he's got a team, and we're still there to support him, but in a slightly different way. So we've been actually meeting his team along the way as they've been brought into the organization.
Yeah. Now, Chris, as you started on the journey, we talked a little bit about, kind of the high level outcomes that the culture of Sarepta drives, of which you're obviously a part of. But did you have kind of an end goal or a vision that led you forward as you went through the transformation journey that you kind of set out at the outset?
Yeah, again, when I first started, I was basically, it was myself and one other person on my team that was focused on our travel and meetings spend. But the ask at the CFO at the time was, almost operate as a pilot, right? I want to see, you've said all the right things. We believe in this. We want to see you show that value, right? Yeah. Influence. Let's see the results, and then we'll go from there. So really, that was my focus, right, from the beginning. Was I just want to show this company what good procurement can do and the value that we can bring, and then the results would speak for themselves, right? And that was the approach. And the end state, again, I think as this, to me, it's always a moving target, right? Because mm-hmm. I think how we define value can take on different definitions based on different perspectives at different points in time. But that to me was the goal, is to build a team that can just continue to deliver value for our business partners and for the patient community. And we're still going down that journey. And so I think it's something that, again, that's always my goal, is to build a team that we're confident in that we stand by our work and we can constantly deliver value. So
I like the fact you said, and you highlighted that there's not necessarily an end state. You know, we use the word transformation, and transformation, just the word, you know, alludes to the fact that there's a beginning and an end. Whereas it's truly, there may be some heavy lifting at the beginning, but it's really an ongoing continuous improvement once you've done the initial heavy lift, as opposed to finishing and say, yeah, we're done, you know, and patting yourself on the back. And it's always, how can we improve from here?
No, exactly. It's not as if we need to reach a specific team size or hit a certain number of criteria to say that we're done. Because our commitment is to be flexible, right? And based on the needs of the company, our stakeholders, our journey is never done. Right. If we get to a certain size, or where we think we are maturity-wise, and there's always things that we should continue to evolve. I don't think we're ever just going to be a steady state necessarily, because again, Sarepta as a company, as a culture, we're continuing to push, right? And if we're, you know, moving into new therapeutic areas, new disease indications, because again, it's, you know, we're never going to be satisfied until
there's always a new challenge.
Exactly. Right. So we need to, and our approach and our philosophy as a procurement organization matches that.
So Jen, when you come into the start of a transformation, what are some of the things that and kind of critical considerations that procurement teams should be thinking about as they're about to embark on that journey?
I feel like there's got to be a better way to say this, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But pick your battles. I don't want to say that they're battles. That's why I don't like saying it that way. But it's really about making sure that you're not taking on things that you can't handle within your current capacity or based on the resources you have. Or, you know, again, just don't try to take on more than you can, because what Chris said is you're there to demonstrate the value that procurement can deliver. And if you take on something that you know you're not capable of because you're just trying to prove something and you fail, it's a lot harder to recoup that broken trust that you've got from the stakeholder community than it is to just say, we're not ready for that, but here's what we can do. I think that shows that gesture of we can help you, just not completely in the way that you need help with, but here are some other resources. It's about just providing the right level of support based on where you are.
And we have a question from Christy that we got in advance, which just kind of builds on that. Do we need to do a formal maturity assessment before starting our journey, or can we just agree on a vision and go?
So I actually get this question a lot, and I can speak from experience, having seen procurement organizations try to do that and fail, because it's not just a maturity assessment. I think there's a sort of a misconception about, okay, it's just maturity. I know how mature we are or not. There's a lot more to a maturity assessment than just a piece of paper that says you're a laggard or you're best in class. There's an entire set of discovery that happens behind the scenes that evaluate all of the details behind that maturity. So that maturity assessment piece is just the beginning. It's really all of the elements of setting that future state vision and building the plan, because a vision is only one small aspect of it. You need to know what goes into building that vision. So if you want to be here in this amount of time, well, you need to know how to get there. You need that roadmap. That's really the meat of the maturity assessment. It's not just where you are, it's where you're going and how that all ties together. So when we talk about doing a maturity assessment, it's maturity assessment and plan, not just, hey, you're laggard, have a good day. There's a lot more to it.
Chris, as you were starting on that journey, did you, because what Jen says about the maturity assessment, a big piece of that is also that self-awareness of where you stand in the organization today. So you actually have an idea of what you need to overcome on that journey. How did you go about kind of getting the pulse of the organization, if you will, in terms of how they perceived, not necessarily perceived procurement, because you said, you stood this up from the beginning, but how they perceived the involvement of another group in helping them do something that they'd done on their own before?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think, as you touched upon, we didn't need to do a maturity assessment from a procurement perspective. There wasn't any, right? So, but what I did was, early on, it was really about establishing relationships. And the CFO at the time gave me kind of two areas to focus on when I started, right? Which was working with our clinical group and IT, right? And some of that was just, again, educating them, learning about how they've operated, their thoughts or preconceived notions about working with procurement, how that's gone for them in the past. But it was interesting, right? Because again, with the way the company was growing and the mission to move quickly, right? It was kind of like I was being brought in to solve a problem that they didn't think existed, right? They were like, look, we're moving, we're crushing our milestones and all of these different things, and they were. So it was definitely interesting. But to me, one of the first things I wanted to do was just kind of understand, to your point, where the company was culturally around their thoughts and feelings and what they would be ready for in terms of procurement, right? So if I were to drop in a best-in-class procurement model, right, that has been published in a white paper, it wouldn't have worked, right? Because there was a lot of other factors that, and even as robust as that model is, that the company necessarily wasn't ready for, right? Because again, their priorities were aligned to something different. So it was really meeting key stakeholders, understanding their world, what their priorities are, and then finding opportunities to show value and prove to them that their world doesn't have to change, and their mission and their focus and their execution, and we can just layer in being a good partner. So that to me was the first step, is just kind of understanding, like, what did I think that the company would be ready for on day one.
And Kelly, I'm going to come to you in a moment for some questions that we've got from the audience, but I did want to follow up. One thing I wanted to make a comment. It's ironic, given we talked about sales at the very beginning, because it sounds like you had to sell them on the problem that they faced in the first place, which is kind of consultative selling. So once they understand that they have a challenge that you could help them with, then you could start helping them meet that challenge or address that challenge or opportunity. The question that I had that followed up on the work that you did with the clinical group in IT, as you started to show areas of value where you could help them, was there anything off the table, or were you doing the things that, they necessarily wouldn't scale? They may not have been, in a procurement person's mind, the most strategic or value added, but you would do anything you could to demonstrate that you could be a good partner. Like, how did you kind of balance that level of support?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really just looked for the best opportunities that I thought I could make a meaningful impact without having to involve them or distract them too much from what they were doing, right? So if on day one I said, hey, if you guys just work with me, we can open up this huge sourcing event, right? That already, I think it would have been like, see, you're coming in here and I know that you have a job to do, but you're distracting our team from, again, our mission is to focus on patients. So it was interesting. I was working with a bunch of different groups, and again, early on, just understanding what are the different pain points, because there was folks in finance and in accounting that had different pain points than the direct business stakeholders. And pulling some of that together, we were able to kind of find some really significant quick wins that we didn't really have to use a significant amount of the business's time, right? We sold them on what we were going to do, and they said, that's fine. Let's see how that goes. And we had some really amazing results. So already they were able to come back and say, wow, just working with you and being cooperative, like, you didn't have to come in and take a ton of our time and distract us. Just by letting you in, you were able to show value right away. So that was one of kind of the opening aha moments that I felt like got us some traction, and we were able to kind of, people took notice very early on.
And Jen, I'm sure it's something that you see all the time. I've certainly seen it from my perspective, is picking the wrong categories to start with is, a shortcut to failure in a lot of attempted transformations.
No, absolutely. And I completely echo what Chris just said. I was thinking about that too, is like celebrating those little wins with wherever you get them, right? And I think we take for granted when we're on this journey that we're so focused on getting to the big wins that we don't highlight those small things enough, or even with the people that we're working with, because sometimes they don't even know how big of wins they are. So I often tell people, don't shy away from just saying, hey, this was great. We were able to achieve this in this amount of time. By the way, that's pretty unusual, because they don't live in our world. They don't know how long things are supposed to take. So when you highlight that and bring attention to that, you're essentially creating an advocate that can go out into the business and sell that message on your behalf. And now you have those cheerleaders that you need, so that you're not the only one in the stand, so to speak, trying to get the value of procurement out there.
So Kelly, let me come over to you and ask if well, I know we've had a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So it's about picking and choosing, to coin the phrase, I think picking and choosing our battles, with the battles being the questions today, because we've got a lot of them. So thank you. And do please keep sending them in. Kelly, where would you like to start on what we've had in today so far?
This is tough because we've already covered a lot of ground, and these are great questions. So I think one of these questions that ends up being a little bit of a follow-on to something that you had shared earlier, Chris, you talked about having a commitment to flexibility, because what the business needs may change. And certainly we all know external conditions are all over the place. To what extent do you see there being a connection between helping your procurement team become more mature overall, and then along that journey, continuing to work with the type of agility that you think the business needs and that external conditions justify?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I feel like we're living this every day, right? So first of all, I'm fortunate enough, I have an amazing team, right? So they're super motivated. They have entrepreneurial spirit and they're really good procurement professionals. So right away, I'm just fortunate to have that. I think, we talk about being flexible. So again, this goes back to a one size fits all approach. And sometimes there's instances where I've said, this could have been done a lot better if had engaged us, and we could have gone through our full process, right? But again, we're still, a growing function that we're trying to establish ourselves. So we're not going to take an all or nothing approach of, well, you didn't engage us, so we're not going to do anything, and we don't want to be involved because it should have gone through this entire process, and that's best in class, right? So we identify those things and we try to work with the business and say, hey, this should have been done better. But at the same time, we're like, all right, well, we only have a short amount of time. What can we do? What are the priorities of this project? What are the optimal outcomes? And we're willing to be flexible. And I think that the business, our stakeholders appreciate that, because again, our having an amazing team, if they were able to get more time or more lead time on some of these projects, the outcomes would be exponentially better. But they're really good about saying, you know what, I can sit here and just turn this down or kind of push back on the business, but I'm going to take them on and just show the value I can extract from something in a short amount of time. So that to me, and we're very good about being, honest and open. If we don't have the bandwidth, or there's a particular project that, given the circumstances, we don't know that we can extract a ton of value, we're going to say, look, we'll document that one and we'll let it move through, because we don't want to be a bottleneck. So we're always trying to be agile, but at the same time, we are trying to put some standards in place so that we do get engaged early, and our team is able to really unleash the maximum amount of value that they can with early engagement or some of these different things. But so we're very flexible, and that was a commitment that we're not going to sit there and build a long queue of projects and say, you have to work with procurement, we'll get to you when we get to you, right? Yeah. That's not offering value. We're slowing things down, and quite frankly, we're going to create risk. So, but that's something that we're balancing every day, and our team is fantastic about doing that.
It's interesting, Phil, and you'll know the exact wording, because this is definitely something that you say. So hopefully I'm close with this, but it makes me think of that expression, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one we talk about. So Chris actually mentioned it earlier about, you could take a white paper that talks about best practices, for example, and try and implement that. But it's really all about, who's best, what's the best fit for each organization. And there is no single off the shelf, these are the 10 steps, and you have to take them, in painstaking detail, and don't kind of go off and do things in a different way. And that's the only way you'll get your result, because you've really got to build yourself and the process you go through around what the organization needs and its own maturity and its own view of what the value that you can bring is.
Yeah. Now, let me bring you in, Jennifer, because I think this is an interesting question. So we've talked about, do you have C-level support? Do you have the right staffing? Do you have the frameworks and processes? And I'll acknowledge that in addition to the questions that we're seeing and sharing, I'm actually getting a lot of comments coming in, and quite a few people have commented that you need all of it, right? All of those pieces really have to come together for the results to be delivered, for the maturity to be achieved. But if you have to stagger the priority you place on things or the investment that you make, what if you have a team of great people that maybe even has been successful in delivering results, but the structure isn't there? Is there a way to standardize, to give people something consistent to fall back on without losing maybe a little bit of the magic that comes from having a terrific team in place?
So I'd have to say a couple of things. First of all, if you have a great team, that's honestly where I've seen the most success in a transformation journey, because it starts with having dedicated, passionate people. And that's another reason why I was super excited to be here with Chris today, because and I'm not trying to embarrass you, Chris, but he's one of the most passionate people I've seen when it comes to procurement and what he's trying to achieve there in a lot of ways. So I definitely compliment that. And I agree, when you have the right team in place, the other stuff becomes easier, if you will. And when I say great people, I think they're dedicated, they're talented, they're motivated. So they can kind of roll with the punches of, I know I'm coming into an environment that doesn't have the best processes or technology, but I'm here to get us to the next step and make sure we get there. So they can be a bit more averse to, some of the chaos that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis and still forge ahead. So I would say, the other piece I was going to mention is, I think people think at times that I have to start with people, then move to processes, or I have to start, it's not like that, right? There's a lot of, like, if you look at a Gantt chart, there's a lot of moving parts. It's okay, maybe if I'm starting with P2P process, then I'm starting with the P2P process, then I'm moving on to P2P technology, and then I'm training the people. Then it's somewhere below that, you're starting with sourcing and CLM. And so it's staggered, right? There's not one that goes before the other. It's all kind of in flow. And that priority really depends on your organization and what you're trying to achieve. So, a sourcing tool may not be the biggest priority, but a P2P is, or vice versa, right? It really depends on where you are and what you're trying to achieve and how you prioritize those different elements.
Yeah. And one other question for you, Jen, and then Phil, this will probably serve as a great transition to the next section of questions that I know you want to put to Chris and Jennifer. We've talked a lot about procurement capabilities, but I think leadership and change management abilities are incredibly important to that as well. So if you're relatively new to an organization, Connor is asking, what are the most important traits in the person, whether it's Chris in this case or someone else in his shoes, in his position, to be able to come into a new organization and in relatively short order, get some type of positive change started?
So it was interesting. That's interesting. I was just talking to a colleague this morning about the qualities that we look for in a good consultant, and I think it's very similar. You have to be adaptive, inquisitive, curious, and able to learn quickly, right? You don't have to come in and know everything about procurement in order to be a successful procurement, but you need to be able to move quickly from one thing to the next and show up with the right approach to demonstrate that value and learn as you go. So I think that's what really is important, and really focus on what you're good at, start there, and then figure out where your weaknesses are and build from there. So if if IT is your strongest area, then start in IT while you learn marketing, right? If we think about it from a category perspective, you're not limited to what you know or where your expertise is. Just honestly, you're just limited by your own boundaries that you set on yourself.
Excellent. Well, then I'm going to go back and pause and continue reading some of the more questions that have come in. Phil, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And I do want to say, just to add on the people question. Jen and I worked on a transformation where the people were there, and so sometimes it's just giving them the tools or the frameworks or the processes or the vision to actually be able to execute on it. Oftentimes we go into a transformation, I know I say this a lot, where and this obviously wasn't relevant in Chris's case with Chris building from scratch, but where you go into a transformation and the immediate thought is, well, we got to get rid of all the folks who are on the team because the reason that we need to do a transformation is because the team failed. And often that's not the case. It's about prescribing what the true problem was. And actually you can make some really small changes and tweaks that can make big differences, as opposed to just thinking you got to kind of throw out everything and start from scratch again.
And actually, Phil, that's really interesting that you reminded me of that one we worked on. And the small change was honestly just a small change in management and that person knew they were in a role that wasn't good for them, and therefore they were misleading the team as a result.
Yeah.
So once they stepped down and they shifted that, oh yeah, the entire team just flourished.
Right. Now I want to move on from the kind of standing up the organization to scaling the organization, Chris. So as you started to get those wins and you built some advocates within the business, how did you then go about kind of scaling those good practices and with that thinking about, okay, should I now start to make investments in technology as I start to enable, more to scale those good practices within my group?
Yeah, so for us, again, we really looked to scale based on marketing all of the great value, right, that we were able to extract, right? And things that I think we were really doing a good job making sure that we created that awareness and made sure it got to the C-suite. But one thing that I felt was really helpful for us is that we also, in presenting to our C-suite on what we were doing, we brought along the stakeholders that were involved in letting us in and being collaborative, right? Yeah. Instead of taking the approach of, these are the groups that aren't working with us, bringing them, again, to these executive committee presentations and giving them credit, right, we couldn't have done this without them, right? They trusted us, they let us in, and we showed fantastic results. That, and then them being able to speak to and advocate on our behalf of how successful things were, was now not just me coming in to say, hey, our team's doing a great job. They were hearing it from a different perspective. So again, everything we do, we're always making sure that we then back it up. And so most recently, our big milestone is that we were able to get a procurement engagement policy rolled out company-wide. And that was a big challenge because we were thinking about, is the team the right size? Is this, this kind of policy, it's kind of new to the culture of Sarepta. We didn't want it to be viewed as red tape. So a lot went into that. So that was a big milestone in getting that out there. And now we're going to continue to manage towards that. And we expect it to still be an uphill battle in the early days, right? This policy being rolled out is not the magic cure that we're going to get in all this engagement overnight. And, as a result, get this huge team. So, I really think it was about managing expectations, delivering on what we said that we were going to do, continuing to market that value, and again, showing all of the benefits that our stakeholders were getting, not just our procurement metrics of saying that we're doing a good job, the feedback from our business partners of, yeah, we know, the procurement team saved us some money, but they really helped us, de-risk a contract, or they really helped us improve a supplier relationship with governance or other things. So that to me has been the value that we can show, and the validation through that has allowed us to grow the team.
Yeah, to demonstrate the value that you can bring and then spread the word. And you talked earlier about advocates who then encourage other folks to see procurement as being somebody who can drive value for them, as opposed to somebody to be afraid of that's going to put roadblocks in their way.
Right, exactly. Because Jennifer and I have talked about this. You can do the analysis of, based on the spend in the different areas, how many people you think you need, which is just very black and white, and it's a data-driven conversation, which is very important. But layering in that the additional value that we're driving with those investments, based on actual results, has been where we've seen a lot of success. And again, the value that we've shown is just 100% as a result of the great people we have on the team. So I'm just, again, extremely fortunate, but we have people that are just tenacious, they're entrepreneurial. And again, that lends itself to everyone seeing the value. And it's hard, quite frankly, we're getting to a point where I feel like it's very hard for people to make an argument against investing in our group. And again, so it's becoming easier and easier every day that goes by, because the team just continues to deliver.
Yeah, which is fantastic for you, because you have the confidence to, as going back to that sales role, you're going out there and selling the procurement value proposition, the executives of the company, that you can deliver on that. You know that you're not going and over promising, and there's a risk of under delivering because you want to, you want folks to work with you. But you've just got that confidence that you can deliver and more on the things that you tell your stakeholders when you go and talk to them about procurement.
Right, absolutely. And to that point, again, I know earlier on I said I didn't think sales was for me, but selling the value of what my team can do is very easy. It comes organically because it's. I say all the time, if you give us an opportunity, I know we're going to knock it out of the park. You're not going to regret it. So, again, I am very confident that no one can make a real strong argument against not engaging our team or not investing in us. And again, we've been fortunate enough that we've seen that support from our C-suite from day one.
Now, Kelly, I'm going to come back to you again in a couple of minutes, but I have a question. And Kelly and I's colleague Helen always teases me about governance and how I, talk about governance and the role that I see that it can play for a procurement organization. You talked about communication and marketing of the things that you do. Did you build a governance program around the engagement of procurement with senior stakeholders, or how did you kind of manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have a rough framework around that, but it's a work in progress, right? Because the other thing, again, as we've built this team, they have a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and for their sections, we have an overarching philosophy, right? But it's not a one size fits all. So different parts of the business are establishing different operating models or how to engage, right? Because it looks different at different groups. So I think, again, and it goes back to us being flexible and dynamic, right? Because if we were to sit there and say, this is the governance model, right? And this is it, right? And I expect everyone to engage their stakeholders and senior leadership for the business partners that they support in the same exact fashion. Again, it would be turned off because again, you think about especially in a biotech group, these stakeholders have completely different perspectives. Talking to someone in IT versus talking to someone in gene therapy manufacturing, you don't want to come in there and just say, oh, well, this model worked great over here. They're going to be like, well, I'm a completely different business unit. We have different needs and different priorities. So we're taking a flexible approach and we're being adaptive, right? We're trying to track data. We're tracking these opportunities and looking to see how do we use real life examples and data to help inform that governance rather than coming up with an out of the box one and just pushing that. So again, we have a philosophy, but it's still a work in progress to see what works best.
Well, I think in an organization, like you say, where you're making the steps into not being seen as being controlling, not going there and being a spend manager saying, hey, all this spend now I'm going to control on your behalf. It definitely makes sense to have a flexible model that goes with the agility that we talked about earlier. Because again, that's another way that we can turn people off is by putting in, and I've been there and done it, putting in too much process. And then that takes you further away from the goal that you have. Jen, I've got a question, and then I'm going to go over to Kelly that we got in advance. And the question came in from Landon. The question was, how do we figure out which areas of maturity are going to be best advanced by investments in talent versus tech versus process redesign?
I think I go back to what I mentioned before, which is it really depends on your particular organization and where you're trying to go, but also some of the elements that we talked about today, which is the C-level support, the relationships you have in the business, because you as procurement may know that technology is the strongest area to invest in right now, but if you don't have the right processes in place and the people to execute those processes, then you're going to waste the investment on the technology. But at the same time, you need to make sure it really I just always say it comes back to prescription before diagnosis. It's understanding what elements are going to be most important, but based on talking to everybody in the business, right? It's not just having this procurement focused approach. And that actually goes back to the question from prior. Do we just set a vision and go? Well, I would have to say that vision might be a bit one-sided if you're not talking to other people. And when you have an introspective review of things, it's what does procurement need, what does procurement want? Well, then you're perceiving what you believe the business needs and wants from you without asking them. And that's probably the most interesting part I find in the maturity assessment in all the interviews and the workshops is just sometimes people haven't been asked, what do you think we should do? And they get super excited. Now they're empowered. Now they're advocates. Again, change management, the core of change management is people. It's just, making people a big focus of everything. So I think people is, throughout the whole course, whether it's your internal team or your stakeholders, making people a big focus. It's probably like my roundabout answer is people is going to be your biggest investment no matter what you do. But it's not always the obvious of, yes, you have to go hire people to make an investment. The investment is your time in the people in the organization and getting the buy-in you need.
Yeah, and I've seen so many of those workshops where sometimes you're afraid of going out and asking people in the business what they think because you don't want to hear the answer.
Yeah.
Or you don't want, a 50-minute conversation about why it was really difficult for somebody to order a pencil or a ruler and, kind of system problems. But you see the lights going off in people's minds when they get asked those questions in those roundtables and those workshops, that they truly do become they turn from being skeptics to being wanting to help you solve the problem.
Right. And that's another reason why, people often ask, do we have to hire a consultant to do this? Well, no, but it's just the nature of humans, right? They're not going to tell procurement, we don't like what you're doing, but they'll tell some consultant they never met and never see again, all their problems and dirty secrets. So that's the benefit, is the objective third party will get just more candor out of them.
Thanks, Jen. So Kelly, a couple of the questions that we've got in, where would you like to start?
I know exactly where I want to start. And this is sort of connected to what we were talking about. Before I put this question up, Jennifer, this is for you. I would just like to say I love this question because this is the world that procurement functions in. How do you respond to management that is afraid of procurement having too much success? Because if we do too good of a job and the business likes us too much, we're going to have to hire more people, and that costs money. This to me hits right to the core of the matter. What do you think about this? I know, we're like, yes, exactly.
Where's the problem? Where's the problem here? Yeah, it is interesting, and it's not an unfounded fear, unfortunately. I think it's all about making sure, again, you understand management's perspective on things. So if there is a lot of success, what does success mean to management versus what success means to the stakeholder community, and balancing how you report that back out? Because like you said, at the end of the day, it's all about the return on the investment. And if you can say, well, hard dollar savings is the most important to you. Okay, well, we've saved X amount of hard dollar in hard dollar savings. This is the over and above of the head count of the team. It's sort of an equation that answers itself. Well, we can afford more people because we're delivering the value and we're paying for ourselves. We're a self-funding model. I mean, how cool is that? How many different functions in the organization can say that? So I always find it interesting to hear things like this, because procurement's probably one of the best. But at the same time, if you're not bringing in savings, it's like, well, what are you doing wrong? But again, that's where it comes back to making sure you know all of the different aspects of what's delivering value. And it's not always hard dollar savings. There's a lot of other things that we deliver in creating the right business case.
Yeah. And Chris, sort of a different slant on that question, but more directly based on your experience at Sarepta. Amy is asking, how do you measure? And I would actually, based on Jennifer's comments, add measure and track, because not everything is dollars and cents. But how do you measure the incremental value procurement has been able to deliver as a result of your increased maturity?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And we've recently established some starting metrics, right? But I think one of the things that we're doing, and we have our team do, is in addition to just our projects and our standard metrics of avoidance and savings and things like that, right? We're really tasking people with going through it. And again, as part of our marketing deck, is highlighting and summarizing those projects that we've taken on that had nothing to do with the outcome was not a procurement metric, a typical procurement metric, right? So risk reduction, improving timelines, driving innovation, things that aren't easy to flash on a dashboard, right? And that's where we've really worked with some of our business partners to summarize and celebrate those things, because those are the things that I think resonate more, right? It's coming in and having a great procurement dashboard. That's awesome. but it needs to tie back to like the business being happy, right? So we at least at Sarepta, our company is not driven by a good procurement dashboard, right? I think that's important for our function, but it has to also translate back to how it's enabling the business, right? So oftentimes our stakeholders are not very concerned with the fact that we save the money. They're like, oh, that's nice. It's these other things that we've reduced risk, we've improved the supplier relationship, just better quality, all of these things. So again, we're working on ways to, we don't have metrics that specifically can measure how much risk we reduced in a particular contract, but we're summarizing those things, and part of our marketing deck is kind of beyond the metrics is, all right, here's our dashboard. Here are the highlights of what some of these things mean that are not obvious kind of metric-driven wins for the function.
And the fact that you have a marketing deck, right? I mean, that's not something that all procurement teams have. So you kind of say that in passing, but that's an incredibly important asset to have. So Phil, I know we're getting close to being up against it. There's a million questions more here, but I'll probably pass back to you to sort of round out the hour with Chris and Jennifer.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you for everybody who submitted your questions in today to Jen and to Chris. Now, I just wanted to follow up actually on Amy's question. So one of the ways that we can think about that is something like a net promoter score. So it's very, it's so much of the value that we bring is subjective. So how do we measure something that's subjective? How do we measure kind of how somebody feels about the experience that they had with working with procurement? And I think sometimes we miss that and we focus on the hard numbers, which is what we're trained to do. But at the end of the day, the perception of procurement will largely be driven on feeling rather than on numbers. And something like that is just one way to think about for how you measure, how you're perceived, and kind of track that on an ongoing basis. So the last kind of set of questions, maybe even the last question, given the time we have left, Chris, I just like for you to speak a little bit about what's next. As you've kind of got yourself to the stage where you are, the success that you're having with your teams, how do you look at continuing the journey?
Yeah, so I look at it as like, for us, the work is just beginning, right? Mm-hmm. So even though we've been going through this journey, I think launching our procurement engagement policy was a huge milestone for our team, and everyone really did contribute to that effort in developing it and understanding how we're going to implement it. Now we're really going to start tracking how are we doing against that, and then how do we need to adapt, right? Because we know that it's going to be an iterative process, but we needed to get something out there. So, that's where we're going. We're really trying to, again, we're doing road shows to market this, to make sure, we have corporate communications, send out emails. It's going into people's training requirements. Everyone has to get trained to take tests on it. But I think the point is, where we go next is really up to us, right? Mm-hmm. So we put this policy out there, and much like we've done in the past, we're going to deliver and show value against it. But we're going to track and see, all right, where do we need more improvements? Where do we need more outreach to train people on this? I'm just as interested in the opportunities that we may not be able to take on, or the ones that we've missed, as we, as much as we celebrate the ones that we have taken on. So there's a lot of work to see how this unfolds, how the business reacts to it. To your point, what are the feelings about people kind of now being forced to work with procurement, and how do we navigate that? Not just feeling like a mandate, but again, policy to us is just a backing, right? We don't want to rule by policy. We want our work to speak for itself, but we're backed by, that helps us for those pockets where people are hesitant, right? This helps them push them into our world, and then we know that we'll deliver good results, and it will speak for itself. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're excited that we get the policy out. Now we're gonna be tracking metrics and see how we do against engagement and what that looks like, and how we have to adapt, because again, we're going to be dynamic and adapt to the needs of the business.
It sounds like exciting times ahead, Chris. I want to thank you so much for you sharing your journey with us. Jen, thank you as well for joining us to provide some color to Chris's journey, but also some context for some of the things that you see across all the different transformations that you work on. I do just want to remind everybody who joined us today, for our future events that we have, you can always go to artofprocurement.com/calendar. That's artofprocurement.com/calendar for details of our upcoming webinars and digital events. So everything will always be there. One last time, just as we wrap up, again, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Kelly and Phil.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Talk to you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.